Let's start creating and using arrays. Now, what is an array? Arrays are pretty easy to describe, and we'll go through the motions of putting things together, and then in this section we're actually going to create, manipulate, build, and look at all the different functions that you can work with arrays. It's very deep within PHP, extremely deep. You're going to really enjoy it. Alright, so what we have here at the top here is a visual representation of an array. It's just an HTML table, as you can see. But this can describe an array very easily. The array is the bucket that holds these values. Now the darker line, this signals the actual elements or the keys in the array. So when you want to reference 4, for example, you would reference the 4th or 5th element and then you would get the value there. This is actually going to be the 5th element in the array, but it has the key or the element to find the value, which is 4 here. It starts off at 0 in computer math, and it goes from 0 to 4, but this is the 5th element. And then the value stored inside here, this is the actual data, that's going to be the value here. That's 11. So if we look at arrays inside of our creating and using arrays file, we can see that in order to create an array, we can use different types of structures of how we would put the syntax together. Now basically what we have here is the same $ variable name, and I normally put AR underscore with my arrays because it just signals to me that I'm using an array, because they don't look any different than anything else, any other variables. They look the same. So you want to put some kind of prefix here to signal that you're using an array. And then what you do is you use the array keyword equals array, and then you can put values in here to start it. You don't have to do it that way. You can just have it without the values in between, and then you have an array that doesn't have any values in it. But normally you would want to initialize your array, like you see here. So the 0 element here is 100, 217 would be the 1 element, the second element would be 333, and that's really the third element. But how you reference it is 0, 1, 2. But this is the first, second, and third element. A little confusing, but it's pretty straightforward when you start to see how things look and start to work with them. You just start the actual way to get into that, to find the element. You start off with 0 and work your way up. You can also change that. You don't have to start at 0. It's up to you, really. Alright, so there are different ways that we can actually set up arrays. This is an array of integer values, and note the semicolon at the end. This next array, months, here we start with a 1, because when we program, we know that in real life, when we deal with months, we know that January is the first month. So instead of starting with 0, you can add this to the beginning of your array, or any element really in your array, to specifically start or have that value be placed there. So we're going to start with 1 here, and it's equals greater than to get that to go, and then you would put in your single quotes or double quotes or just an integer or any type of data, and you would have that start there and continue. So if we look here, we can see a representation here, which is the same thing. We have different elements, and this is how we would output our arrays, and you can see that the first element is January, and then the 12th element is December. And I'll show you how we output this. Continuing. Now, the reason I call them keys and elements is because these are elements when you describe them numerically, but when you actually start to use alphanumeric characters to signal the bucket that this is going to be described by this bucket as A, when you start to do that, then it's really starting to look like a key, meaning that you specify the key that you want to find, and then you get a value. Normally a lot with web design, you do a lot with key value pairs, like for example the query string or cookies. Well, it's similar, and then we can reference it as A, B, C, etc. But this is the syntax. Something equals greater than sign and then the value, and then you can reference it with ease. I'll show you how that's done. Another example, we start off at 0 and then we work our way up, and then at some point we make the 10th element directly equal to 14 as the value. And then we can even specify the 5th element later on as 12. So whenever you do that, you're doing one or the other, and I'll show you how that looks in the output. So let's look at the bottom examples. So before we get into the big details, this is going to be what I was talking about, the representation in this top section here, 0 to 9, and that represents 100 and all these different values here. So how you would try to get at that value is using the elements here. So 0, 1, 2, 3, and continuing down to 9, we have 10. So we find the first one, which is the 0 element, and this is how you would reference that. We're going to use this a lot in different things dealing with PHP, but this is how you would reference that. We just echo it out. As you can see, semicolon for sure at the end of that. And you can see that this is the variable here. Like I said, I always put AR underscore, well, most of the time. And when you give examples here in training courses and things like that, it becomes a little bit more clear and takes up less space when you just put months and courses and things like that. It's a lot more clear that way, but you might want to try that in your own examples. So very easily, that's output for us. You could switch that around if you want to, make some changes, see how that works. And this is another way to actually print out the array information. If you know it's an array, you do print underscore r. It's a function, parenthesis, end parenthesis, and then the array that you want to pass. And this is like a formatted print. It knows that it's an array, and it will print it out like this, just like you have when you actually create the array. So you can actually copy this, if you wanted to, and save it somewhere. And then you could initialize the array as you want to. So it's very powerful. If you think about it, you can do some dynamic things to actually create arrays, similar to how you can do that with JavaScript. And this is very, very powerful. So this is exactly the way it looks, or very similar to how it looks, except for the commas. They're not going to be there. And in this example, we have commas and we have the quotes and things like that. So you would have to add your quotes in order to get that to look exactly the same. And of course, this is a lowercase a instead of the uppercase a. But that's how it would look if you just want to see, you want to test and see what the values are. You use the print underscore r function. So we can look at some more examples at the bottom here. There we go. Now we're going to echo out these values, and you can see we just referenced that second one, and we referenced the different positions here, as you can see. And this should be 17. And we just echo that out. And here you can see we have the 0 element, which is 43. The fourth one's not specified. And then the 17th element is 56. So we go back up here. And we look at the second one here. Notice that we go from 0, 1, 2, 3. We skip 4. And we actually go all the way up to 10. And then we backtrack to 5. But you can see that we also specify 17. So we're specifying which ones we want to see there. And that's very powerful to be able to do that. But you can see that we didn't specify 4, as you can see. And if we change this here, actually we have it here at the bottom, as you can see. So we'll change it just to put it up top in this little section here, and then we'll revert back at the end. And there you go. You can see what was set there. 0, 1, 2, 3 skips to 10. Then it sets 5, 11, 17. So in this order, we never set 4 or anything else outside of the range here. But they went in order to this point. Similar to how we changed it here when we forced a 1 here, and then afterwards we just continue to increment, and it will take it based on the last value that was set, whether it is set because we force it with this notation or just because it's the next element. So it will automatically go to 2, etc. So you can see that. You can play around with that as well. We're going to be doing a lot with arrays in this section. And then if we go down, you can see that we can use a for loop here. And a for loop is very powerful when working with arrays. As you can see, I is equal to 0 here is where we start because we're dealing with the start of an array. And then we go to the count. This is how you get the count of an array. one way to do that. Count, open paren, close paren, just a function, and then you pass in between there, you put the actual variable there. It needs to be an array there. And then you can also get the size of. Two different ways of doing it. So you're going to get the count or the size of. And that's very self-explanatory. And then you just output the values. You output the key or element, and then you also output the array, and with the brackets, you have inside there the array here, which is the element that you want to find. Very easy. So we comma separate this echo, so it looks very nice and formatted for us. Very powerful to do things like this. It helps you to really, really, really put your data together. And then we can see the next one. We go from a count of 0 to 22. For $i is equal to 0, it's less than 23, so it will never be 23. In this loop, it will stop at 22, whole numbers, increment by 1, and then we just echo out again the same thing. So that's very similar to this, except we're actually specifying the count instead of allowing this to go by the size of. And the size of is going to give one more than the last element there. So if you have 10 as a size, it will go from 0 to 9 here in this case. And again, we just print out AR values. I wanted to make sure that we didn't change those values, because not only can you set those values, but you can change them as well. And we'll see that as we move forward. So again, arrays are extremely powerful and very, very, very key to working with robust type of programming in any language.